Hi there. In this video, we're going to talk about factoring out the GCF. The GCF stands for the greatest common factor. And this is one of the first things you need to learn when you learn about factoring in general. It's very important to know how to factor out the GCF. And we'll talk about more general factoring in later videos. All right, so let's just take a look at a problem where I'm going to actually do the opposite of factoring. I'm going to multiply something out, and then we're going to look at how to undo that, which is factoring. So let's take a look at this problem here. Okay, so here we have an expression. Let me see if I can fix the exposure here, make that a little more visible. There we go. Here we have an expression, and I want to multiply this out. Okay, so how would I multiply this? Well, I would distribute the 2 across. So 2 times 3x is 6x, and then minus 2 times 5 is 10. So when I multiply this, multiplying takes me from here to here. And that's what multiplying does. Factoring is going to be the opposite of that. Factoring is going to be doing the reverse. So why would we ever want to do that? Why would we want to undo this multiplication? Well, it turns out that you see what happened when we factored. We got 2 different pieces. These individual pieces are called the factors. Now, looking at the individual factors can help us better understand the expression that we're dealing with. Much like when a scientist is working on an organism, the scientist might dissect the organism, might pull it apart into its pieces to better understand how that organism works. Well, we're doing the same thing. If I started with something like this, I may want to factor it, pull it apart into its pieces, and by looking at the individual factors, I get a better understanding of how that expression works. And so that's why this is important. So let's think about how we would do this. If I started with this expression, right, so maybe our problem was as follows. This is the problem we're given, factor 6x minus 10. How would we figure out how to get it back to this form? Well, what did we do to get here? Well, we multiplied both of these pieces by 2. Well, what that means is that these 2 numbers, 6 and 10, must therefore be divisible by 2. That means that when you divide them by 2, you get a whole number. So that's what we have to look for. We have to look for the things that these numbers are divisible by. If they're divisible by the same number, then that number is called a common factor, and we can factor it out. And what we're actually looking for is the greatest common factor, which is the largest thing that these 2 things are divisible by. And we call that the GCF. So our first step here is to find the GCF. So I'm going to look at these expressions, the 6x and the 10, and ask myself, what's the largest thing these are both divisible by? So what is 6 divisible by? It's divisible by the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 6. What is 10 divisible by? It's divisible by 1, 2, 5, and 10. So of those numbers, what is the largest thing they are both divisible by? Well, it's a 2. 2 is the largest number they are both divisible by, so that's the GCF. That is the thing that I want to factor out. So what I'm going to do is I know I'm going to write my final answer as 2 times something. 2 times what? How do I figure out what goes in these parentheses? Well, I ask myself, what do I have to multiply 2 by to get 6x? Or in other words, what's 6x divided by 2? It's 3x. And then I say, well, okay, well, what do I have to multiply 2 by to get 10? In other words, what's 10 divided by 2? Well, it's 5. And of course, I need a minus sign here for this to work out. And voila, I have factored this, and this is my answer. Notice that we have gone from the right to the left in what we started with. We undid that multiplication. Okay, so here's our next problem. Factor 4x cubed plus 8x squared. Okay, so our first step is to find the GCF. the greatest common factor. Okay, so let's start by looking at just the numbers here. We've got the numbers 4 and 8. So what are the factors? What are the factors of 4? Well, it's 1, 2, and 4. And what are the factors of 8? In other words, what is 8 divisible by? Well, 1, 2, 4, and 8. Okay, so what is the largest number they're both divisible by? Well, the largest number they share in common there is 4. So that's the number part of my GCF. Now my GCF will also have a variable part in it. So we have to now think about that. So we need to think, what is the largest power of x, x, x squared, x cubed, x to the fourth, that goes into x cubed and also goes into x squared? Well, it must be x squared. You see, it can't be x cubed because x cubed does not go into x squared, right? 3 is bigger than 2, so it can't be that big. And x squared it goes into both of these. You can rewrite both of these expressions as something times x squared. X cubed can be written as x times x squared, and x squared is just x squared, right? So x squared is the greatest common factor of x cubed and x squared. And so altogether, our GCF is 4x squared. So that's what we're going to factor out. Okay, so there it is. What do we multiply it by in order to get this expression? Well, I have to ask myself, what do I multiply 4x squared by to get 4x cubed? Well, all that's missing is an x, right? And then what do I multiply 4x squared by to get 8x squared? Well, just 2. So there's my factorization of 4x cubed plus 8x squared. All right, here's our next factoring problem. We want to factor this expression. Okay, let's do like we did before. We find the GCF, and we'll start by just looking at the numerical part here. Okay, so we got 12, 18, and 6. What are the factors of 12? Well, the numbers that 12 is divisible by are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. What about 18? Well, 1, 2, 3, 6, 9, and 18. Okay, and what about 6? 1, 2, 3, and 6. So what is the largest number that these are all divisible by, that each one is divisible by? Well, it would be 6. Okay, so that's the numerical part of my GCF. Now let's look at the variable part. I want to find, for the x's, what's the biggest expression involving x that these are each divisible by? Well, this one's divisible by x squared, this one's divisible by x, and this is divisible by x cubed, right? So the largest thing I can get is just an x. Now let's go to the y's. Here we have a y squared, y cubed, y cubed. The largest power that goes into all of these is just y squared. And now we go to the z's. This has a z, z squared. This doesn't have any z's. So this is not divisible by z at all, so I cannot include z in my GCF. Okay, so there's our GCF, so we're going to factor it out. I'm going to write it on the outside. And now what do I multiply this by to get all of this stuff? Well, let's just start with the first piece, this one right here. What do I multiply the 6 by to get the 12? Well, I have to multiply it by 2 to get 12. 6 times 2 is 12. What about the x's? What do I have to multiply x by to get x squared? Well, x times x is x squared. What do I multiply the y squared by to get y squared? Well, if I multiply it by 2x, I'll have it. It's done. Don't need to worry about that. I already have y squared. What about the z? Well, this doesn't have a z in it, so I'm going to have to put a z here. And so if I multiply this times this, I will get this. So I'm done with our first term. So let's move on to the second term. What do I multiply 6 by to get 18? Well, that's 3. The x is already taken care of. I need a y cubed, so I better multiply the y squared times y. Y squared times y is y cubed. And now I'm going to need a z squared. Well, it ain't coming from here, so I better put it over here. Okay? So now we go to the last term. What do I multiply the 6 by to get 6? Well, that's just a 1. You could write 1 here, but you don't have to if there's other things there, right? So I'm not going to write it. So x times, and then to get the x cubed, what do I multiply the x by to get x cubed? Well, I'm going to need an x squared. X times x squared is x cubed. What do I multiply the y squared by to get y cubed? Well, y squared times y is y cubed. So I need an x squared y. And this is the factored form. This is our final answer. Okay, our next factoring problem looks like this. Okay, so I want to find the GCF. That's the first thing we write down. So the GCF, the greatest common factor. So I'm going to look at these two terms separated by the plus sign and ask myself, what is the largest thing that they are both divisible by? Well, let's look at the numbers, 7 and 5. Well, 7 is divisible by 1 and 7. 5 is divisible by 1 and 5. The largest thing they're divisible by is just 1. All right, so just 1. What about the A here? This has an A in it, but this one doesn't have an A, so I can't include A. You know, this one's divisible by A, but this one's not, so I can't include A in the GCF. Let's look at the next factor here, the next thing being multiplied. It's an A minus 3. This one also has an A minus 3. They both have A minus 3, so I can include A minus 3 in my GCF. Now, 1 times something is just that something. So I could just write the GCF as just A minus 3. I don't need to include the 1. Okay, so that's my GCF. This is the largest thing they are both divisible by. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor that out. So what do I multiply A minus 3 by to get this first term? Well, just look at what's A minus 3 multiplied by. It's being multiplied by a 7A. There you go. If I multiply this times this, I'll get this. Now what about this next term here? What do I multiply A by minus 3 by to get 5A minus 3? Well, it's sitting right here. It's a 5. So there we go. And this is the factored form. So sometimes the thing you factor out is going to be an expression involving a plus or minus sign, and that's what happened here.